A century ago, it was obviously a totally different world, different thoughts, different beliefs, different practices. And while we no longer accept many of these concepts for politically being correct, for tonight's topic, I wanted to revisit a time long ago when phrases that are no longer acceptable were very common.
I made the comment when you sent me this. I was sitting at my computer and you texted me the name for this episode, and I looked at my son and I said, well, we're getting canceled. and to be fair, if we were a bigger pop culture phenomenon,
we probably wouldn't be able to cover this.
Might get us in a little trouble.
Yeah. Many traveling circuses in the 1800s and 1900s saw humans with physical deformities as a way to make a quick buck. Spectators would flock to see these sideshows as these humans and animals with strange mutations were put on display and labeled freak shows. Now, that's a word I'm going to try not to use a lot tonight, but we no longer use that particular word for obvious reasons. So, again, moving forward, we're going to try not to use that a lot tonight. We're going to call it curiosity circus sideshows. And while these practices did exist in a different time, and today some of these actions would be purely criminal by all means, as circuses often purchased children with these unique conditions, their story still needs to be shared and told. Many of these kind souls would not have had a means to survive, much less find financial comfort, turning their limitations into extraordinary, thriving positions and jobs, allowing them to further their educations, to travel the world, rubbing shoulders with the royalty and the most elite of the day. Join us tonight as we pull up the circus tent flaps and learn more about this fascinating, true, historic legends of the curiosity sideshow era.
From a child born into this world, we are taught what to believe. Closed-minded we become, fearful to be deceived. Still we desire to know what lies beyond that locked door. The art of the storyteller, conjuring tales of legend and lore. History hidden, lost knowledge, things forgotten and the unknown. These are the things that direct us and will set the tone. Welcome, friends, to another episode of Nightmares on the Lost Highway.
Now this episode again could be
cringe for sure.
Could be cringe. We certainly don't intend for it to be that way. We're simply looking at a point in American history where certain con men, shysters or showmen would exploit people with differences, and not always, by virtue of the way they were born. Some of these people, you're at a point in time where simply just having a lot of tattoos was enough to set you apart. Yes. Multiple piercings, things like that. And again, Eric referenced, animals. There were definitely animal acts. There were people who had talents that could be exploited, sword swallowers and fire breathers and things like that. So not everybody at this point in time, it wasn't only limited to people with, born differently or people who had suffered accidents and had physical scars and modifications to their bodies like that. But again, this episode could absolutely be, discomforting to people that are sensitive to that. So we're going to try to tackle it as sensitive as possible. Like Eric said, the reference to the word freak show, we certainly want to try to steer away from that. Again, some of these people would not have been able to live had it not been for this particular career path. They wouldn't have been able to survive. They wouldn't have been able to make money. So again, some of these people really did benefit from this.
I'm a very weird individual, as Bill knows me long enough to, compare to. But to me, I think it's a shame that this has almost become a taboo topic. Not that we need to go back to it by any means, but I am a firm believer in history, as I've been labeled the historian. We need to learn from our mistakes. And if that does not mean erase it so that maybe we would recreate it, these people, some of these people were genius. Just because they may have been born differently, they defied everything that was in front of them and defeated odds. Just that you and I could not even imagine. And their stories do, I believe, deserve to be told. But again, to Bill's point, if these type of things are, maybe a little touchy with you or you're a little more sensitive, I totally understand. This one may not be for you. Most of this took place from the 1880s up till about 1940s. And it definitely was a bit darker and sinister for some of our listeners especially. But as we've done in the past, I like to give that warning in advance. But if you're open to explore history, sometimes even history that's hard to comprehend, to wrap your mind around.
Well, not all history is good.
Absolutely.
And like
I'd say
Eric
a
said,
lot of history is not good.
We don't want to neglect history just because it's kind of a darker phase. I mean, we talked about, the Victorian baby farmers and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people did a lot of bad things.
And they still do today.
And again, just ignoring it doesn't make it go away.
It doesn't go away.
And I think there's a certain segment of society nowadays that kind of wants to turn a blind eye and just pretend certain things never happened. I don't really want to go down the road, but even just like Civil War stuff, let's just get rid of the monuments and whatnot. I don't think we need to glorify the Confederacy. Obviously, the Confederacy was not on the right side of history, but you can't forget that happened. You can't just pretend it never existed. So
yeah. So again, we're going to make our best attempt to tackle this kind of taboo subject. As Bill said, if we were more popular, we might not even be able to share with you, but we're going to do it with the best we can of respect and care.
So typically, in what was called the freak show, they would be exhibitions of biological rarities, and at the time, in the pop culture parlance of the time, they called them freaks of nature. Now nowadays, you would say these people were born with physical deformities, sometimes mental deficiencies, but not always. Sometimes,
and some were self-inflicted.
Yeah,
to your point of piercings, tattooing.
Yeah.
Yep.
But mostly it would be people that were uncommonly large, uncommonly small, intersex variations, people with extraordinary diseases and conditions, things that some were performances, things that were expected to be shocking. The term geek refers to biting the head off of a chicken, which would routinely be part of these kind of acts.
And you said the key word there. The more shocking meant the more money.
Yeah.
The bigger the price of the ticket. That's what they want, the shock factor.
Yeah, like we referenced, heavily tattooed and pierced people would be seen in these kinds of things. As a matter of fact, there's a guy known nowadays as the Enigma, I believe, who's tattooed with the puzzle pattern. He's been in the X-Files and a bunch of other stuff.
Yep.
Split tongue, eyebrow ridges, things like that. He's sort of a modern sideshow performer. But like Eric said, during the late 19th century, early 20th century, these shows were at the height of their popularity, especially between the 1840s and the 1940s. And they were just routinely like a for-profit thing organized by, in a lot of cases, con men, because a lot of these things they weren't always what they were presented as. A lot of these were kind of a con in a lot of situations. But a lot of times, again, physical, mental, behavioral rarities, the showmen, the promoters of all types, they would bring in all types of people to show them off. Unfortunately,
almost like an audition.
Yeah. Unfortunately, at the time, a lot of non-white people were involved in this because, again, they could be presented as a rarity. This was, a pygmy from wherever or some sort of person, the last of a lost tribe or whatever. They would do these kinds of things. They would present people as missing links. A lot of people who were dwarves would be presented because they're so small or their proportions were so unusual. These would be labeled as exotic people from these exotic places. And a lot of times they were just people from born and raised here in America, whatever.
They're saying they're from some island in the South Pacific that was just discovered, and they were from Cincinnati, Ohio, or whatever. Yeah. In a way, you could almost compare it to kind of professional wrestling. And some professional wrestling jargon actually comes from yes, it did.
The sideshow performances of kayfabe, especially, which is sort of the practice of keeping the story, intact. You never give up the story. You never give up the con. Kayfabe, if you want to think about it, would be, in modern terms, professional wrestling analogy, when you see the good guy and the bad guy in the ring and they hate each other and they want to kill each other and they're beating each other senseless. Behind the scenes, a lot of times these guys are buddies.
Oh, yeah.
And they might go out to dinner or hang out at each other's house
afterwards,
or go to each other's weddings and things like that. But, even in wrestling terms, you kept those things separate to the point where during sort of this same time frame in America, Like the good guys and the bad guys weren't allowed to interact with each other in public in any way, shape, or form. So again, they wanted to keep this con, if you will, going. Now, by the 1940s, of course, they had started to lose their audience. A lot of these conditions were starting to be recognized for what they were, and we started to medicalize these things. We started to recognize that, hey, people are born different, and that's okay. And I believe there were even laws passed that prevented the exploitation of people with conditions for profit.
And I'll talk a little bit about that.
Again, if they wanted to be a part of it and they were complicit in it, that was fine. But you couldn't take people with, say, mental deficiencies that had deformities and exploit them for money. Now, of course, you want to talk about, the name that goes along with all this. You have P.T. Barnum.
Oh, yes.
He was sort of the father of modern day advertising and one of the most famous / infamous showmen and managers in this particular industry. And it was very common for Barnum's acts to be schemes and not altogether true. Barnum himself once said, "I don't believe in duping the public, but I believe in first attracting and then pleasing them." Another time, when asked if his exhibits were real or a sham, he replied, "That's just the question. Persons who pay their money at the door have a right to form their own opinions after they have gone up the stairs." So that was sort of his thing. Like, he was a known con man.
This also kind of went hand in hand with the sideshows of the made-up creatures, the Fiji mermaid,
Yes, absolutely,
and they would merge different corpses of different creatures and come up with some crazy, wild, a sailor in such and such, the Indian Ocean, netted this creature. And you had mentioned the 1940s, which definitely seemed to be a major turning event. I think that can also be described as more people got the means to travel, especially after World War II in the 40s. Some of the stuff they had been given to as bold-faced lies, they were finding out they were debunking it, essentially.
Well, and at the same time, additionally, you had other forms of entertainment that were coming into popularity.
The silent films came out in the late 20s and all of this. But yeah, if you rolled into town on a train or a stagecoach wagon into a little country town, we'll even say like right here in rural Missouri, especially at that time, there were people who couldn't even read and write, much less that ever traveled probably beyond 10 miles of their home. And you presented this, let's just say they were more open, gullible, whatever you want to say, and they believed in all this type stuff. So it kind of phased itself out, which is an interesting fact in itself.
Yeah, throughout the 1840s and until, the art form sort of disappeared, Barnum had constantly rotating acts. And I think Eric's got some more, but, people that were way, way overweight, people that were way, way underweight, that he would call living skeletons. You had, little people, giants, people that were being labeled at the time as freaks. And you also had Barnum himself giving lectures about how he discovered these people or where they came from, which a lot of times was just so much hokum. Theatrical performance, there were animal menagerie, and people, glimpse of these curiosities, both living and dead. They weren't above showing a body it was going to get them an extra quarter, which I think we would all, absolutely be, that is completely unacceptable. And so, he would take these people around and exhibit them. And in some cases, like we said, they made pretty decent money doing this.
Some of them became filthy rich doing this.
And so they were able to earn a living doing this.
I wanted to share just a few of the characters I'd come across as I built my list. His name is Marin de Joe, born in the Netherlands in 1912. Now, he astonished the medical community by piercing his body with all sorts of objects, seemingly without any pain or injury. He would use knives. He would use butter knives, dull knives, swords, sticking them through his stomach and his abdomen to come out the other side. He allowed doctors, nurses, experts to closely examine these feats under total disbelief, even to the point at one point going under X-rays with the blades showing as they were penetrating through his body and coming out the other side. The weird part of this story is there was never any blood or injury or even a puncture wound, only a red, kind of like a scuff, maybe a scratch. But this brought him great fame, all into from 1912 all the way up into his end of his life in the 1940s. He is remembered as a mysterious and enigmatic figure that no one could disprove that had these superhuman feats. He left his mark as a true curiosity of disbelief upon the world. Another example, Johnny Eck. Now, Johnny was born in Baltimore, Maryland in 1911. The half man was literally born without any lower torso or legs whatsoever. He would easily walk around on his hands, using his arms as his legs, with no apparent lower region whatsoever, basically from the belly button down. He became an actor with strong ties to the early horror film scene. And although born with this extreme disability, Johnny Eck did not allow this to dictate his life. Instead, he became a master performer, able to do handstands, almost defy gravity with feats of strength and agility. He had a great charismatic presence, and he was a master acrobat. He was also a talented painter, a musician, and a filmmaker. His fame grew when he starred in the 1932 film Freaks, showcasing that he was more than just his disability, and it surpassed his physical appearance. He challenged society's beliefs at that time, especially of what it meant to be normal, and he was an inspiration to everyone that they said that he met. Johnny Eck is remembered fondly as the star of the sideshow world of curiosity and with great talent.
Well, Barnum had an English counterpart. His name was Tom Norman. He was a renowned Victorian showman whose traveling exhibitions featured, again, a wide variety of people with different conditions or different talents and abilities. And of course, he also did like the flea circus act.
Oh yes,
which is pretty well renowned con. Now, most famous Norman in 1984 came in contact with Joseph Merrick, and if you're not familiar with that name, you may have heard him referred to as the Elephant Man. He was from Leicester and had extreme deformities. He had arrived in London and into Merrick's care. Norman, initially shocked by Merrick's appearance, was reluctant to display him. So shows you, just even then, he was not so keen on that. But nonetheless, he did eventually have an exhibition with him, which actually took place directly across the road from the London hospital. Now, because of the proximity of the hospital, they would receive medical students and doctors as visitors, and one of these was a young surgeon named Frederick Treves, who arranged to have Merrick brought to the hospital to be examined. Now, the exhibition of the Elephant Man was reasonably successful. However, public opinion about freak shows at this point in time was starting to change, and the display of human novelties was starting to be seen as distasteful. After just a few weeks with Norman, the exhibition was shut down by the police, and Norman and Merrick parted ways. Now, Merrick would go on to live at the London hospital until his death in 1890, and in Treves' 1923 memoir, The Elephant Man and Other Reminiscences, it made Norman infamous as a drunk who cruelly exploited Merrick. Another way to display human oddities was in what they called a dime museum. And in a dime museum, performers were exhibited as an educational display of people with different disabilities. Freak shows, of course, were the main attraction of these dime museums during the 1870s and the 1900s, with the human oddity as the king of this type of entertainment. There were 4 types of abnormalities on display in dime museums. Natural born, those people born with physical or mental abnormalities. Self-made, who were people that were, again, tattooed, pierced, things like that. Novelty artists, who were considered freaks by nature of their freakish performances. Snake charmers, mesmerists, hypnotists, fire breathers. And then non-Western, who were promoted as exotic curiosity, savages and cannibals, supposedly from Africa. These freak shows also provided audiences with medical testimonials provided by doctors, psychologists, and other so-called experts. And I'll say that in quotes. A lot of times these guys were just in on the con. The con. They were actors.
Yeah.
But they were there to help the audience understand, this particular person and their condition.
Again, I loved your throwback, and I hadn't thought about it before, but back to the wrestling time frame. There's a lot of this that actually transmits back to, you got someone telling the story, this made up, dreamed up version. Let's take The Undertaker for an example. I mean, come on. The story constantly changing and evolving and dressed up with makeup to look freakish by nature, that awe, factor. Well, I've got a few more I want to share here. Another one by the name of Martin Lorello. Now, he was born as a German immigrant in the early 1900s. He was known as the Owl Man. He possessed an extraordinary...
I saw pictures of that guy.
I saw like some silent film footage. Oh, it is weird. He possessed this extraordinary and unique ability for being able to turn his head like 180 degrees. It was later discovered he actually dislocated his skull from his vertebrae to perform these stunts. And he would leave the audiences, for obvious reasons, in awe, many times several fainting at the sight. One of his favorite and most requested tricks would be to rotate his head fully around to see behind him, then drink a beer and smoke a cigarette before he rotated his head back around.
It's really unnerving to see, too. Because, as modern human beings, when you see somebody's head on backwards, that means they're dead.
Yeah.
And this guy is just...
and he's able to talk and communicate and, smoke
weird.
Cigarettes, drink beer. But, this was not some circus sideshow trick, but rather a long-time practice and learned physical feat that he worked on for his entire life, making him one of the all-time best performers in the curiosity sideshow realm. Now, he performed in many sideshow and circus exhibitions, where he was most often the center of attention. He would come in and just steal the show, so to speak. He will be remembered as one of the true sensations of physical determination and has earned a spot, I felt, on my list in the circus sideshow realm forever. Another is Alice Elizabeth Daughtry. She was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota in 1887. She is commonly known as the Werewolf Girl. Now, her story is as unique as it is truly rare. She carried a very rare genetic condition called hypercosnosis, also legiganosa, causing her to be born with a thick layer of extremely soft and lightweight fur or hair known as lanoga that covered her entire body. Now, from a very young age, Alice attracted great attention of all those around her, and so her parents decided to display her in the curiosity sideshows. Now, despite this seemingly odd exposure of being on exhibit, Alice lived a pretty normal life, constantly surrounded by the love and care of her family, who traveled with her, basically, I'm sure, to take in all the sights and the traveling, but also to look after their daughter. She went on to be a major drawing card for circus sideshows, where she would dress in a very fine white Victorian dress with shiny shoes and advertised as the Werewolf Girl. So this discolored hair would really pop, if you had all white on.
There's a particular family in Mexico where multiple generations have that same condition.
I think I saw that. Another I have, Myrtle Corman. Now, she was born in 1868. She is known as the Four-Legged Girl from Texas. She entered the horror show circuit at the tender age of 13 and adopted her name as the Four-Legged Girl from Texas. Now, she was highlighted feature attraction for many different circuses, drawing much attention with a rare disorder called Depegus, which gave her an additional set of smaller legs in between her normal legs. Now, these legs were only about half the size of her primary dominant legs, but were animated and usable, however, just much weaker. This condition, they believe, is due to being born with a parasitic twin that did not fully develop and was ultimately absorbed by this stronger twin, which was Myrtle. Although she was discovered in Texas and promoted as the Four-Legged Girl from Texas, she actually was born in Tennessee. Now, Myrtle spent most of her time in Texas, however, performing with circus sideshows there, and that's why that she got that subtitle. Now, she lived a relatively long life, all the way up to the age of 59 when she passed away. One more I'll share with you is Pascua Penjanon, promoted at the time as the Two-Headed Mexican. He was a railroad worker in Mexico when he was discovered by a circus promoter due to a large tumor or a cyst on his forehead, which was about 3/4 the size of his true skull. To enhance this visual appeal, to help him blend in more, as it was written, with the circus sideshow professions, a mask was formed for this tumor and sculpted so that it was to feature, basically form, a nose, eyes, and a mouth. Then makeup artists would help him prepare his prosthetic piece, applying shadowing and makeup to even entice or enhance, I should say, this tumor face to appear more lifelike and real for audiences. Now, contrary to this very questionable lifestyle, Pasqua did this freely, and he sent the money that he earned back home to support his entire family during very hard times, making a very good life for both himself personally and his entire family. He traveled all through America, drawing great crowds wherever he attended, and Pasqua Penjuan is remembered as a fascinating figure of the circus sideshow attractions of the time.
I've got a similar list, obviously, that I put together, but one of my favorite stories was that of one of Barnum's most popular acts, which was the tattooed man, George Constantinos, who claimed to be a Greek Albanian prince raised in a Turkish harem. He had 338 tattoos covering his body, each one ornate, and they told a story. Now, his story, his stage story, was that he was on a military expedition but was captured by native people who gave him the choice of either being chopped up into little pieces or receiving full-body tattoos, which I guess if you had to make the choice.
Full-body tattoos it is.
Tattoos. This process supposedly took 3 months, and he was the only hostage to survive the process. When he partnered with Barnum, he began making more than $1,000 a week, which in those terms, I mean, that's very, very good money.
Mm-hmm.
The New York Times wrote, quote, "He wears very handsome diamond rings and other jewelry, valued altogether at about $3,000, about $94,000 in 2024 dollars, and usually goes armed to protect himself from persons who might attempt to rob him. Though he was fortunate, obviously others were not so lucky, as we've talked about, and upon his death in 1891, he donated about half of his life's earnings to other people who did not make as much money on the freak show circuit as he did."
The next one I will talk about is Pauline Musters. Now, she was born in the Netherlands in 1876. She was known as the world's smallest woman. Now, throughout her short life, she lasted until 1895, just shy of being 19 years old. She reached a maximum height of 58 centimeters. Now, that's just under 23 inches. Her small structure catapulted her into a worldwide fame within the traveling circus and sideshow attractions of the time. This enabled her to travel the world over, where she was treated like royalty to dine with kings and queens, quite literally. She often appeared with a full-grown man who would carry her out on the stage looking much like a toy doll, and then she would raise her head slowly and start performing of dancing and her antics. She performed in a variety of shows, captivating the audience not only due to her small stature, but her kind soul and her charisma. Pauline would succumb to pneumonia and meningitis just before her 19th birthday, but not before leaving her tiny footprint in the Walk of Fame for the traveling circus shows. Another, Prince Randian, born in British Guiana in 1871. He was known as the Human Serpent. He was born under great duress, most challenging of obstacles, being born without any arms or legs whatsoever, not even stubs. But that did not stop great Prince Randian. Oh no, not at all. Despite his obvious physical limitations, it is said he was as agile as a cat and as strong as a bull, using only his head and his torso, but he taught himself how to roll his own cigarettes, light his own match, and smoke them, and even shave himself with a sharp straight razor propped up on the side of a small wooden box just made to help him hold items in place. Now, Prince Randian could inch his way around, similar to that of a caterpillar moving at great speeds, equal to that walking of a man. He could also pull himself up into a chair, turn around, and face his many visitors and his fans. He became a sensational hit in the horror and sideshow time frame of the day. He joined P.T. Barnum there at the circus, where he slithered his way into the hearts of thousands, charming the crowds. We move on to Chang and Ang Bunker. Now, this one is bizarre.
Famous. They're very famous, too.
Very
that's
famous.
That's a well-known story.
They were born in Thailand back in 1811. So, I mean, surely this is some of the earliest versions. They were the first known and most famous, arguably, conjoined twins. They were joined at the sternum, with their livers fused together as one. Now, the twins moved to the United States in 1829, and there they gained fame in performing in various circuses and fairs. There, they would showcase their unique situation to overcome their physical disabilities, awing the audience with assisting one another just in simple tasks of buttoning buttons, tying their shoes, just to impress the audiences. They would often remove their suit coats and their shirts to show the audience how and where they were joined there at the sternum, the chest region, where itself was a significant sight to see. Now, Chang and Eng were never separated one from another for their entire lives, but this did not stop them from finding love, and eventually each marrying and each having children to start their own families. Not so sure how that worked out. Maybe a blindfold and earplugs were needed, especially on the honeymoon times. But the two of these brothers not only had set this precedence of being kind of the first conjoined twins, but however all that other worked, they had the most children of any conjoined twins, with a whopping total of 21 children between the two of them, or should I say the one of them. Chang and Yang became household names and amassed a fortune for their endeavors and supported their quite large family with various homes and the finest items of the time.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Chang and Eng's career ended when one of them had a stroke.
I didn't get that.
Yeah, one of them had a stroke, and I can't remember which. It left him permanently disabled, and I believe, if I remember correctly, that twin died before the other one.
Oh.
And so, I've seen this reference somewhere, but it was, imagine the horror.
Dragging
that
around.
The surviving twin went through. When the one twin died, the other one knew, like, his life was done. Imagine, I don't know if he woke up to that. I don't know if he died, suddenly.
Right.
But imagine that experience. Like,
Ugh.
you know that your life is almost done.
Yeah.
And to have your dead brother there, that'd be chilling.
Yeah.
Couple that I want to drop in. Here's one of the ones who's not a, this guy had a freakish talent. Lepetamain, whose real name was Joseph Pujol, was a French performer who made his name in the late 19th century as a flatulist, which is pretty much exactly what you think it is. This is a person who farts on command. He could blow out candles, jet water at great distances, and even play wind instruments exactly how you think.
Wind instruments.
Which would be
wow. I'll never think about the same.
There was also Ella Harper, the camel girl. She was born in 1870 with a rare genetic condition called congenital genu recurvatum, which caused her knees to bend backwards. Due to this condition, it was preferable to her to walk around on all fours than to try to walk upright. She made about $200 a week, about $5,500 in today's money. $5,500 a week.
That's a lot.
Yeah, that's crazy. Another one of the Jojo, the dog-faced boy, worked for Barnum when he was 16. His name was Fedor Jeftishu. He was born with hypertrichosis, which resulted in his face being almost fully covered in hair. Now, Barnum claimed he was tracked down and captured by a hunter and that he was a civilized savage. And to add to this, Fedor would bark and growl on stage, to play up that gimmick. Lionel, the lion-faced man, was Stefan Bibrowski. He also suffered from hypertrichosis. His hair grew longer than Fedor's, and so he was branded to be part lion. Looked like he had a lion's mane. Now, this was weird, because the alleged cause was that his father had been mauled by a lion while his mother was pregnant with him. I don't.
How's that work?
Yeah, I don't get how that comes together. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So,
well, I have another one now here. Actually, many of you might be familiar without even realizing. The name is Schlitzie.
Yep.
Born in 1901, the star of the 1930s film, again, Freaks, literally stole the entire movie with his appearance. Schlitzie's was a circus and sideshow performer born with a condition called microcephaly, which gave him a small head and some intellectual challenges to face his entire life. But this did not stop this great man. He was a natural performer, and he found his calling in the world along with many of the other sideshow traveling circuses. He almost always wore a red bow to hold his pop-knot hair back, and often wore what many would consider plain dresses. He had a charismatic laughter and a childlike behavior that was contagious with anyone that came in contact with him.
Well, that was the condition caused the brain to not fully develop. So people with that particular condition were often childlike in their mentality.
Yeah, regardless of their age, they just never matured, for lack of a better way.
Yeah.
He became an instant success, whether singing, dancing, or telling jokes. Schlitzies often, again, stole the show. People could not resist his enthusiasm, his energy, his laughing. Now, his career, again, was catapulted after appearing in that 1932 film, Freaks, where he played himself. Freeing the showing of himself, challenging stereotypes against those with disabilities and challenges, proving anyone can make a difference in the lives of the others. Another that we have to talk about is General Tom Thumb. Born in 1838, his true name being Charles Stratton. Now, he was only 63 centimeters tall, just shy of 25 inches. Again, he was the big little man of stature, recruited by none other than P.T. Barnum when he was only 4 years old. He became the calling card attraction for P.T. Barnum and the Circus Museum there in New York City. But Tom Thumb was not just a cute little mascot for P.T. Barnum. He could sing, he could dance, he even did impersonations of voices of many popular actors and stars of the day, earning him the banner of the one-person show. Tom Thumb was bound for greatness, so he took his show to Europe, where he mingled with royalty, including finding fancy with Queen Victoria. He became a household name. His face became very apparent on trading cards, teacups, proving that successfulness doesn't always have to match up with size or stature. If you have talent and charisma, that's all you need. General Tom Thumb is undoubtedly one of the most famous among all circus sideshow performers of the time. He himself paving the way for many to follow with disabilities and these unique curiosities, proudly standing to welcome any of his kind into fame and fortune rather than ridiculing or poverty. And he also is said to have helped many others. You might consider that as kind of a cliquish group, like I'm making the most money, I'm the star of the show. He was portrayed as, I know you're just starting out, let me give you a loan, I don't expect money back, I will help you as much as I can. And he kind of created the circus family, if you will.
Well, and by all accounts was ridiculously successful, money-wise.
Yeah. On plates, on saucers, cups, toys, trading cards. We have another interesting story. Edward Mordrake. Quite curious case. Born in British high society of wealth and fame, Edward was the man with two faces, but probably not maybe the way you would consider. This was not like a performer who draws a line down the center of their face and styles the hair on one side differently and, making the appearance look differently, but rather one with his skull literally having two heads, one smaller, about 3/4 of the size of his primary head or his skull, and it directly protruded out of the back of his main primary head. These skulls are one. They were fused together. Now, not like the cyst or the growth of the one I talked about, but two skulls merged together. Now, the belief is that he was twins in the womb, and the stronger Edward absorbed the weaker twin by this lasting side effect. Now, if this wasn't strange enough, Edward stated the smaller head behind him would tell him things, whisper vile and dark atrocities to him, which he constantly had to resist. Now, he sought out the best doctors and surgeons of the time, but due to being the very early 1900s, medical technology had no viable way to rectify this strange condition. This caused Edward Mordrake to seek out spiritualists, even in the occult, as specialists, and a means to find a way to silence this sinister voice that he constantly heard over his shoulder that nearly drove him insane. And it is said by the time he was in his late 20s, he had sunk deep into depression, solitude, and madness, ultimately taking his own life. Now, story and legacy, however, lived on when his family, gotta love families sometimes, who had practically turned their backs upon their son many years before, allowed the body, now being returned to him with the fused skulls, to be mummified for science, where they eagerly sold it off to traveling circus shows. So, even after death, this poor man was put on exhibit, and a small plaque telling the story. However, in recent years of research, most agree this entire story to be debunked, a hoax, for nothing more than a circus sideshow attraction horror piece. Because there is no record of birth nor death of his existence anywhere to be found. That being said, of course, fortified believers state this is due to the family having such wealth and literally erasing him from existence of the history books. That one, very interesting, very twisted. Then we have Cuckoo, the bird girl, born in Georgia in 1880. She had a condition called Ver-Chilsicotl syndrome, also known as bird-headed dwarfism. Now, this syndrome gave Cuckoo her unique bird-like facial features: a very small head, long protruding nose, recessed jaw, and somewhat of an elongated skull. Now, despite her limitations, Cuckoo was an absolute star in the traveling circus circles, captivating the stage with her charming voice and captivating personality. Due to vision problems, she did have to be fitted with rather thick and oversized black-framed glasses, which exaggerated her eyes even more, making them look larger. Now, you might be picturing or envisioning this. There was actually a cartoon character created off of her that was used later on in the 50s and 60s. She also donned wearing outfits made with bird feathers, sporting a tall ostrich feather from the top of a cap that she wore on her head. She also left her arms and her legs exposed and hopped around like a chicken, using her arms flapping like wings for great amusements of the audience. Now, this seems quite cruel and odd and very unethical, of course, by today's standards. However, Cuckoo was interviewed several times, and she stated when interviewed how she loved to make the children laugh. She also stated, even with possibly her partial mental issues, that she understood maybe better than the interviewers did. She argued the fact that it was really no different for her to dress up than a clown wearing his makeup and making the children laugh, so why not? She was accepted into the 1932 film, again, Freaks, with great excitement. To make it to the big screen, she considered it one of her awe-inspiring experiences, where she had a very notable role. The latter I want to share is of Grady Stiles, the Lobster Boy. Born in 1937 with a rare condition known as ectrodactyly, which gave him lobster-style hands and feet. Now, Grady started performing in the circus sideshow arenas at a very early age, following in the footsteps of his father, who also had the same condition. And his performance was simply to use his lobster-like hands to move and use everyday items with this curious condition. Now, despite his success and great fame, it was not enough, as tragedy seemed to follow Grady.
I think he was the fourth generation of his family to have that condition.
Might have.
If I remember correctly.
I just stumbled across his father definitely had
Yeah.
it. But yeah, it definitely could have went back. Mr. Grady would become an alcoholic, in which he was known to have a terrible temper. His alcohol abuse and temper finally reached a boiling point when he was convicted of murder of his daughter's fiancé on the eve of their wedding. However, due to his unique condition, he received only a light sentence and placed on very early probation. Now, some say this was due to various circus sideshows competing to get him out of jail in hopes of attracting him for their own use. How sinister is that? In 1992, however, Grady Stiles, Lobster Boy, was murdered by a hitman hired by his wife, Maria Teresa, and his son, basically for former retaliation of the years of abuse that they took from him. Now, Grady's story has to be one of the most sinister and darkest of all the circus curiosity performers in all of history. While many others overcame their physical, possible mental conditions, their diseases, their afflictions, and made their lives better, at least in their eyes, Grady seemed to spiral more and more out of balance with the more fame and the fortune that he got. Now, some of our listeners out there, they may be familiar with the long-running TV series American Horror Story, because their 4th season was called American Horror Story Freak Show. That came out about 2015, which featured a version of this same character, Lobster Boy, and several others mentioned here this evening. The TV series gave a more behind-the-scenes view of one of the last surviving traveling curiosity shows in its time, based out of Florida, and how it struggled both internally as well as externally as the changing world evolved around them.
The time for headlines, Eric?
I do believe it is. I've got one. Strike Wave, July 2020 article. This was written by Kim Kelly, and it was actually titled, Before the ADA, There Was the Freak Show. 30 years ago, the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law. With the ADA's passage, it officially became illegal to discriminate against people with disabilities in all parts of public life, including the workplace. Not every performer ran away to join the circus, as it were. Others were sold into it as children by their parents or were discovered by agents. Joyce Heath, an elderly black blind woman whose performances as George Washington's 116-year-old nurse helped launch P.T. Barnum's career, was actually sold to the promoter by an R.W. Lindsay. Now, there is no way to discuss the sideshow and the history of the freak shows more generally without bringing up this type of exploration. Racism, ableism that characterized so much of its existence, as well as the ethics of exhibiting disabled people's bodies, many times, after they passed away even, for other people's amusement. It's complicated to say the least, and unsurprising that the disabilities rights movement has a very uncomfortable relationship with this part of history. It became big business, too, one that provided ample opportunities for employment for those who fit the bill. At the U.S. sideshow's peak in the 1940s, there was over 100 independent sideshows rolling through America's small towns at any given time. Legendary showman Ward Hall, long known as the King of the Sideshow, remembered in his biography that Billboard magazine used to run advertisements for disabled performers, and that when the traveling show would come through their towns, the locals had the opportunity at least once a year to come out and see the show and interview for a job. As Maria Town, the president of the American Association of People with Disabilities, reported, sideshows set the stage for modern conceptions of disability, identifying people with disabilities as objects of scorn and pity, and inherently other forms of mainstream society. The disability stereotypes that sideshows exhibited were what disability rights movement sought to resist. However, even through those sideshows, as explosive as they may be, there were spaces where people with disabilities like famed conjoined twins Chang and Ing that we talked about, being able to build a worth and curate how individuals looked at them, as people with disabilities worked to reclaim those dignities and separate them with such slang terminologies as the words such as freak. Modern sideshows became important in the development of disabled culture. Now, I think or hope most would acknowledge the sideshow era of America was indeed very unacceptable for a host of many, many reasons that we won't dive all into tonight. However, it was challenged by many of the such performers with these disabilities as a way and a means for them to achieve things never before presented or possible to them. This made it even more disturbing part of our history, with both sides arguing both for and against circus sideshows. Regardless, it was one that is seldom spoke about today for the cringe and unethical treatment that was associated, at least with some of them at the time. And many such owners of these sideshows were able to see it. They were smart enough that they started to separate themselves from it. This, however, did leave hundreds of those with unique and challenging conditions immediately unemployed, with nowhere else for them to turn. Sadly, some of these same performers who went from a well-established lifestyle of luxury financial success to literally becoming homeless and some literally dying in the streets. Perhaps this is why the taboo type topics still exist today, and sometimes how it seems viable to, maybe as it is easier to try to erase them, but if we don't talk about it, it doesn't necessarily mean, as Bill said, it doesn't go away. But as a historian, I'm a firm believer that we must not erase history, but rather learn from it, no matter how dark and sinister it may be, lest we forget.
Well, Eric went heavy, so I went light. From boingboing.net by Popkin, dated August 13th, 2024. Fudge, freaks, and formaldehyde. Unexpected thrills off the Missouri highway. And Eric probably
I
already knows
know where
I'm
you're going with this one.
A fun part of driving is finding strange...
Bill, are you going to talk about my Uranus?
You have to phrase that differently, Eric.
You're going to talk about my anus.
No, Uranus.
Uranus?
A fun part of driving is to find strange and random places to visit, of course. And while driving through Missouri on a road trip, the author needed to stop and find a restroom. It was then that they spotted a big sign on the side of the highway that made them chuckle. Uranus Fudge Factory.
Of course.
Now, surely they'd have restrooms there, so they pulled off, found themselves surrounded by various little shops and activities. The Fudge Factory has a fantastic ice cream stand, a huge gift shop with all sorts of trinkets and treats, a playground, and a sideshow museum, which is what brings me here today. They decided to check out the sideshow museum and were thrilled by what they had found. The museum showcases oddities, tributes to various cryptids, and all sorts of fascinating sideshow history. There were old posters from the circus, two-headed pig fetuses and formaldehyde, 3D replicas of sideshow performers, and a real-life two-headed turtle, which was swimming around in a large tank. The staff of the museum are sideshow performers themselves, and includes a real-life sword swallower named Cat. The museum also has a fun gift shop that sells magic tricks, posters, small oddities, jewelry, and more. If you're fascinated by oddities and the history of circus sideshows, this is a fantastic place to stop on a road trip, see fascinating artifacts, and eat some fudge. The Uranus Sideshow is located at 14400 State Highway Z, St. Robert, Missouri, 65584.
That's literally like 20 minutes up the road from us.
One of our all-time favorite jokes is as we leave Springfield, and I'm reminded of this even yesterday. I was in Springfield, had my oldest son with me who's graduated college and embarking on his career, and as we passed the billboard there leaving Springfield, Alex goes, "Dad, you forget something?" And I was like, "What? That there's big fun in Uranus?" I say that almost every time. It's a bad dad joke, but we'll as we're leaving Springfield, you've got that billboard there, and every time I go, "Hey kids,"
you can't resist.
I hear there's big fun in Uranus.
And I mean, a fudge factory named Uranus. And they embrace it. I mean, fully embrace it.
And I'm old enough to remember when there was a big strip club right there. And
yes.
Very tasteless.
Big Louie's, I believe it was called. So is it time for questions?
Mine's pretty simple.
All right. I'll let you go first.
Have you ever seen anything like a sideshow or any kind of exhibition like that? Or a museum that pertain to this kind of thing?
It's an interesting question, and I'm going to answer it in a totally non-expected way. I have seen bits and pieces, but being an artist, I have created some of those circus sideshows that have been purchased. One in particular I did of a skeletal mermaid, framed shadow box, everything, and I will not say the man's name, but a man came from Arkansas who supposedly also has a museum somewhere, I want to say around the Hot Springs, Arkansas area, and had seen my post of my art and was just awed by it. And it was one of those things that I've got kind of a darker side to my art forms, and I like to do some weird stuff like that. So anyhow, he fell in love with it. I had a price on it. I mean, he didn't ask for a discount or nothing. I'm coming up. My wife and I are going to come up. We want this piece for our museum. And they come up and met him. They were the nicest people. He was actually a former circus performer, and I think she had done some acrobatics and stuff. So again, kind of like the ones at Uranus you were talking about. It's interesting because the circus sideshow people are wanting to almost preserve this. They're the ones that are catering it.
Yeah.
So that's the closest I would say to the answer. I have not made it up to the Uranus one. I actually have it on my list. I think it would be very intriguing because they supposedly have like a version of the Fiji mermaid and multiple headed pigs and cows and all kinds of wild stuff. But that was a neat story for me to be able to say that I actually made a piece of art and was sold out of state and apparently was used in a museum.
Well, many, many, many years ago, when Ozfest was a thing, my brother and I got to go one year, and the headline acts was like, I don't know, I think it's the Chevelles or something. I don't even remember the first act. It was Marilyn Manson, Disturbed, Korn, and Ozzy Osbourne.
Wow.
So it's a heck of a lineup. Apparently, at that time, Jonathan Davis would tour with a big van, and part of this, not like a big bus thing, but this bus was like a museum. And in this museum, he had all this weird memorabilia that he had accumulated. And one of the things that I remember seeing there was a Fiji mermaid, which I love Fiji mermaids.
Yeah.
For those of you that aren't really familiar, it's supposed to be proof that mermaids are real. It's literally a monkey, like the top half of a monkey sewed to the bottom half of a fish.
A giant fish, yeah. And some horrible taxidermy.
Yeah. He also had some paintings by John Wayne Gacy in there and some things like that. Now, also, the Alton Supernatural Museum or Paranormal Museum, I can't remember the actual title, they have a Fiji mermaid on display, and they have a little section that's just dedicated to, the sideshow and the history of the sideshow. So I've seen Fiji mermaids twice, which is one of my favorite little pieces of that time.
And there are some that are done, I will say, quite well. And there are some that are,
some
wow, did you
really
get your
bad.
kindergartner to make this out of paper mache or what?
Some of them are almost scary.
Yeah.
Like they got the fang teeth and...
Yeah. Well, my question, we'll veer off a little bit because I don't want to tie us directly to the circus sideshow, but what is the most unique attraction, animal, person, game, ride that really stuck out to you for whatever reason that just seems so weird, obscure, scary, that just kind of sticks out in your mind? I know that's kind of wide and vast, but I'm trying to give you some distance. If you need to think about it, I can go into mine.
No, I've talked about it on the show before, the Glore Psychiatric Museum.
Oh, yeah. They've
got some really just weird things on display there, but the one that really gets me the most, it's a collection of letters, and I'll never forget it because it's kind of chilling to see it. It's really unsettling, but it was a schizophrenic who had written letters, and they would write on these little scraps of paper and then fold them up and drop them in the back of a TV, the big tube TV. And they had like hundreds or thousands of these little notes, and they were all like just the scrawled writings of someone who was obviously not well.
Delusional. And
it's really that's the one that like I'll always remember seeing that because it was just so unsettling.
Made a lasting impact on
it
you.
Was so strange to see. I mean, I know that's not really in the realm of the sideshow act, but that's the one like display I remember seeing that stuck with me the most.
That's why I opened it wide open, because mine's not really circus sideshow related either. But for me, it was a wooden roller coaster ride in the 1980s at Lake of the Ozarks. It was called the Wild Mouse, and was the name of this ride. The track, the rails, almost everything was literally made of wood bolted together, unlike most rides that were made of steel and metal. Yeah. This had very little steel or metal. And I don't hold me to it, but I mean, I think it was like an antique roller coaster they had restored probably 30 years before I rode it. And, it was just kind of there almost as a sideshow attraction of what used to be. But I remember I was dared as a teenager to ride this, which ironically, had I not taken the dare, I would have missed the opportunity as it was totally disassembled and put out of commission year and a half after this. But it was rickety, wobbly for sure. And again, we're talking a full-blown roller coaster, like probably 3 stories tall.
Well, wooden roller coasters are not fun. I'm not a roller coaster guy in general, but I was talked into riding the wooden one down there at Silver Dollar City.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference in the ride between a regular roller coaster and a wooden roller coaster is crazy.
It is.
It's scary.
It's like honest. The difference of riding on rubber wheels and wooden wheels kind of difference. But it was pretty common for the maintenance member. You would watch a couple times a day, just like climb one of the big braces like a tree or a telephone pole and take his wrench out and he's up there, tightening the bolts and the nuts, because with all this vibration, those things would start to back out and come loose. But I remember clutching the roller coaster up on the top of the hill as we went up, and I thought we were going to just drop. I thought whatever is powering this thing doesn't have the ability to lift the like 4 cars to the top. I mean, you made it to the top and you're like, oh, thank God I made it. And you're like, oh my gosh, I've got to go down the other side now. And it went straight down and then into a very sharp corner. And I almost swear the side wheels came up out of the track as we went around that corner. I mean, it felt like we were going to flip over. And it wasn't just part of that experience of the ride. It's like, I almost died right there at that corner. I mean, that was kind of the feeling that you got. Anyhow, I made it, obviously. Am I glad I did it? Well, simply yes, because that time in my life, I very much impressed a couple young teenage girls. So, that was a win. I lived to tell the tale, obviously. But would I do it again today? Probably not. Even if it were available, I will say with my age, my faith in mankind has kind of faded a bit more even from that span of about 40 years ago. And bless those maintenance guys' parts that crawled up there multiple times and tightening those bolts and nuts. But it's just like, I think we were playing with fire, and I am glad they took it down. But it is neat to say I rode a wooden roller coaster, because it was a rickety old antique roller coaster, so there's that. Well, we hope that you have enjoyed a trip down a little bit more sinister trail of a bygone era, where hopefully we've learned a few things, and may we all become better people from our lessons that we've learned from history. We appreciate each and every one of you. We invite you over to our Facebook page to like and share, and on Spotify and all the different platforms. Please leave us a message on what you think. Any of those little extra clicks and likes and shares always helps us out with the algorithms. And we love what we are doing, and we love the fact that we have some dedicated listeners out there that follow us. We appreciate you. Thanks for listening.
Hey, real quick, call to action. I think Eric would agree. We'd like to grow this. Nightmares on the Lost Highway.
Absolutely.
If you could, if you're listening on Apple, if you would go and give us a review and rate us. If you have some feedback, that's fine too. Whatever platform you're listening, follow us, rate us, give us some reviews. That helps get some recognition and gets our name out there.
We do have a Facebook page, Nightmares on the Lost Highway. You can easily find us if you want to communicate with us, if you want to share some possibilities for future podcasts with us. Reach out. We want to talk with you guys.
I want to take a time to thank the people that helped bring this all together. Alex Tudor, you can almost call him our producer at this point. Sarah Tudor, who also helps with some of the technical stuff. I want to take a moment to extend thanks to Eric for letting us use his space to record in, kind of our makeshift studio.
I, in turn, would like to thank Bill for, one, putting up with me and using this camaraderie to do something we both very much love and enjoy doing, and thank Bill's family for allowing him to spend all the time to work and clean up our recordings and present them in what you hear in the final terms, the final edition, if you will.
And I'd like to thank all of you for continuing to listen. I know we've got some loyal followers out there. We do this as a labor of love, but we're happy that there are people that enjoy it hopefully as much as we do.
Thank you very much.